Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Hare Krishna Project podcast. This is episode number 159. Yes, we're just one episode away from our 160th episode, and quick maths, 41 episodes away from our 200th episode. I am delighted to be able to bring you episode 159 this week. Do not forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button so you can be kept updated about future podcasts and video productions from the Hare Krishna Project. And or if you're watching this on Facebook, which is the other location you can watch this podcast, if you haven't already, please do like or follow the Hare Krishna Project Facebook page. You can be kept updated that way about all the exciting things we're doing here at the Hare Krishna Project. Okay, episode number 159. For the first time in a long time, actually, we're going back to Canada. We have been to Canada before this podcast, at least once, maybe twice. We've interviewed devotees from Canada, and I'm delighted to be going back there because, for different reasons, Canada's been back in the UK news over the last 2 weeks, for a whole number of reasons. But we're probably not going to touch on those reasons today. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our guest this week. It's Radha Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much for having me here.
Radha Krishna, Hare Krishna. It's great to have you with us. Thank you for tuning in. I'm great that we managed to sort this out around the time difference as well. There's 8 hours between us. I often find these podcast recordings are a bit challenging based on the time difference. So I'm pleased that we've found this time to do it. Okay, so the first question is the question that every guest gets just to warm them up. Please tell us a little bit about you and where you are from.
Well, first and foremost, I'm a spirit soul. But if we are bringing it back to um, where I am and what I'm inhabiting, I was born in Ontario. I was born to a devotee family, quite a large family. I have 12 siblings. They weren't all there at once, but there, there's there's a good number of us. And yeah, I did not attend Gurukul, but had a very, let's say, relatable experience when I hear Gurukuli's experience, not in the school setting, but the moving around and the sort of very spiritually focused first part, at least. I was homeschooled until I was 10 years old. And I think in today's terms, it would be more likened unto unschooling. So we were taught how to read and how to do some basic math. And then we just followed our parents around. We traveled, we fussed about in the woods and things like that, did lots of reading, lots of art. Um, so sort of a very, I want to say free childhood, but also quite restrictive in sort of we didn't have any television, there was no radio. We weren't connected to a nearby community, so it was very insular as well. Um, yeah, that's just like a brief synopsis. Then
Mm.
I attended um, elementary school, elementary and high school. I attended Catholic school. And then from there, sort of, I don't know, moved on, did a
Did
bit
your
of
Just out of
traveling.
interest, did your parents choose to send you to Catholic school because it was kind of God conscious? There was a bit of theism
Yes,
or teachings about God
yes,
there.
yep, that's exactly why. My father was raised Catholic, so I mean, with the school board here, you have to have a Catholic parent in order to be able to attend. So my father had been raised Catholic, so we were able to get in. And there was a quite serious focus on God, and I really appreciated it. And I actually really maybe enjoyed isn't the right word, but it sparked great interest of having these two seemingly opposing spiritual belief systems and practices. And at their core, they're not that different. And there's, you know, quite a lot of similarities. And then, of course, you know, in high school, there was some small foray. I mean, this was just part of the religious education course, but there was some small foray into world religions. And I mean, the perspective was here are all these religions, and here's why we're better. But it was still so fascinating. And for me, I could see the links there. You know, you've got Buddha of 1,000 arms described in a certain way, and you've got, you know, Jesus' second coming described in Revelations, and you've got the universal form, and they all sound very, very similar. So for me, I didn't have such a hard time navigating those two worlds because ultimately it was, you know, the focus was on God anyway, but the practice was quite different, and the reaction was not always pleasant. I mean, so fun story.
Mm.
We're being a little facetious here, but when I was, I'd say 4 years old, we lived in a very small town. And this was one of the few times we actually did live in community with devotees. And we lived in this little town called Warkworth in Ontario. And there was a small community out in the country. And we invited devotees to our home at that point. And the whole town turned up. And I kid you not, there was the whole like lynch mob there. I mean, nobody was hurt, but I vividly remember a blue pickup truck, like a bright blue pickup truck with a woman in a gold bikini beating on a drum and a huge crowd of people tossing eggs at the house. And my mother grabbing every child she could find and taking us to the back of the house and putting us down into the cellar and telling us not to come out. So that was a very intense experience as a small child. And also, you know, we had bought an abandoned church there. And the I remember it's strange, these very vivid, I can't remember like anything now, but these core memories are just like embedded in there. And I remember going to visit the church and I had this toy iron, like a, you know, for ironing clothing. And there was a suction cup plug. And I remember sticking it on the wall and asking my mother if we could spend the night there. And she said, no, not tonight, another night. Well, that night, a group of people again came and they burnt that church down. And had we spent that night there, there could have been some very intense repercussions aside from just losing a building. Um, but yeah, so I mean, the experience of growing up a Hare Krishna in small towns was not always pleasant. And yet, um, being in school, I mean, I still ended up being, I think, accidentally popular in high school, not in the earlier section. I didn't have any confidence then. But in high school, like I was voted student council president and it was basically just a popularity contest. But my whole slogan was just, she's different. And people were
Mm.
into that, you know, high schoolers. They're like trying to push aside from what's familiar to them and, you know, that kind of anyway, so
Can you just clarify? I think you've just said it, but the reason why you were being attacked, you've talked about two instances when you and your family were being attacked, is because you were Hare Krishna devotees.
yes,
Wow. I
yes,
mean, that sounds
yes.
terrible.
I mean, it sounds like something that would have happened, you know, in like the South of America with just like with African Americans. And
Yeah.
it's one of these, and it like, I mean, I guess no, that can't be said that this was a long time ago. It's still happening. But these just this fear response that not understanding people elicits is quite alarming, actually. And I feel like in some ways it's shifting, and in another way, there's a chance for cultures to be watered down because everybody's accepting of everything, and there's less precision with language, perhaps. I don't know. I don't want to go off on some weird speculation, but I mean, in some ways, things are so much easier. Like vegetarianism is not unheard of. I mean, that was actually a huge point of contention growing up. And like when I started school, I remember this girl, this was after, like, our little elementary school group, we had split up, and based on where we were living in the country, we could either get a bus to one town 30 minutes that way or another town 30 minutes that way. And so we had our little group had split. So we made new friends in different towns, and then we would still come back together as a group. But sometimes somebody would bring a new friend, and that would throw everything off. And I remember being at a friend's house, and she had a selection of like just little packets of chips, right? I guess you guys call them crisps. And so they had different flavors. And one of the flavors was bacon. And so one thing that was actually really nice is my friends who had known me for some time, they really kind of edited, because it had been established early on, they would speak up for me and kind of almost protected me from like getting into trouble, because it was like, oh, you're not allowed to have, you're not allowed to have Coke. You're not allowed to have chocolate. You're not allowed to have anything with meat in it. Like they already knew that. So they already jumped in. Oh, yeah, you're not allowed to have that one. So for me, it was simple. And then this girl, she jumped in. She's like, ugh, you're a vegetarian. That's disgusting. And for probably the only time in my life, I had a quick response. And, I just said, well, I'm not the one eating corpses. And oh my goodness, the awkwardness, because, all my friends, they also ate meat, but there was this great discomfort. And anyway, the food issue became very uncomfortable. But then later on, once I hit university years, it was so bizarre when suddenly I had people who had known me for years ask, is this vegetarian or is this vegan? And I was just like, well, yes, I've grown up this way. Like, of course it is, So it shifted along the way, but initially it was a little awkward, shall we
Mm.
say.
Mm.
And
Well, can
yeah,
you your parents were they or are they disciples of Srila Prabhupada?
they're not. They were actually Kirtananda disciples. They kind of missed the boat by about a year. And that was the whole zonal acharya era. And so they were in his zone. And so my two older brothers went to Gurukul in New Vrindavan. Um, we did not, because we had a batch. So there were two boys, three girls, three boys, one girl, three boys. So the next batch is like, oh, we're not sending our girls away to a foreign country, which I'm very grateful for. Um, I mean, home life had its own challenges, but um, I'm grateful to have not had that experience as well. So, I feel like there was some protection, even if there was other elements that we were not protected from within the family unit itself. So, yeah, I forget where we were, but
I was asking about your parents, were they or are they disciples of Srila Prabhupada? And you mentioned Kirtanananda, and I was going to ask about New Vrindavan, but you answered that question for me. So I'm just being really nosy. So in the 12, where are you in the 12? Are you near the bottom or near the top?
I'm near the top.
Near the top.
So my two older brothers, there's a 6-year gap between them and myself. They're from my mom's previous marriage. And then the rest of us 10 are from my parents.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm the eldest of my parents' children. And so that makes me extra bossy and all sorts of fun things. But yeah, that's where I fall in the lineup.
Great. That's
So I've
great.
had,
Thank you for sharing
and
that.
well, it's been an interesting experience, like having a lot of younger siblings. And I felt like it really was beneficial for having my own children because there was already such experience with childcare and all of that kind of thing. And I learned some things that I think were very beneficial and some things that I would rather not do as a parent, having had first experience. So that was, I mean, I guess we all learn that from our parents to varying extents. And yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I do appreciate it. The next question, you've kind of answered because I don't know much about the guests before I interview them, and I don't always like to find out a lot because I want to be just as surprised by the answers when you provide the answers. So my next question, how did you meet the devotees or st discover Krishna consciousness? Well, I now know your answer that you were raised within the movement, and you've had some interesting experiences. Can I ask that? That's kind of I want to change that question therefore, and just maybe ask about. You've talked about going to university. It was there a point when you rediscovered Krishna consciousness, or you kind of found your faith, or because often people will go through phases of questioning, particularly running away from the tradition they're raised in. What was going on for you in your kind of late teenage, early adulthood years?
Well, so I mean, as a child, there was zero question. Krishna's my best friend, and that's that. Like, you turn to Krishna for everything. And if you're scared, you turn to Nishriyadev. He protects children. That's that. Um, and then, sort of, as I was in early high school, I started sort of, I don't know if it was drifting away or rather just not having exposure and association because we lived 2 hours away from the nearest temple. Um, our, I would consider like our home temple to have been New Vrindavan, and we were many hours away from that. Um, so, I mean, we went and visited, maybe once or twice a year kind of thing, but we did not have like regular devotee association. It was ourselves. Um, so once all of a sudden we all started going to school and there started being very different influences, the practice lessened with my parents as well. You can only sustain your practice through the association of devotees, truly. There are some incredible people who can sustain outside of that, but I think they're very few and far between. Um, so, things became more lax and more influence of friends but I had no name to hide behind that didn't give me away. So having, my my name was Radha Prema Bhakti. So you can't hide from that. And, I always knew when I was going to be called in school because I would get the pause and then McAllister because they were unable to distinguish whether it was even a male or female name. So it would just, I always knew when I was about to be called, and it was a little bit fun for me, I won't lie. But when I went to high school, I was sort of disconnected, I would say. I mean, there was still like, we still had deities at home. I was still worshiping my deities off and on, like, um, and then I had a friend, I forget what class she was in. She was in some class with me, and she was very fascinated with Eastern philosophy at the time. And of course, because of my name, she knew I was a Hare Krishna, and she was very interested in Buddhism at the time. And so she was like, "Oh, I'd really like to go and visit the temple," which would have been in Toronto. So I kind of begrudgingly agreed to go and spend a week with her in the ashram at the Toronto temple. I don't know how her parents gave permission. I don't know how any of it actually came about, or if I proposed it, or I don't know how I thought that was an option. Like just random teenagers showing up to stay at the temple seems very strange to me now as a parent in particular. Um, so we went, and um, of course, Bhakti Mark Swami, that's his base. And he is very adept, and he's always been a family friend. Like, when we were living up in Thunder Bay, it's quite high in northern Ontario. It's off the beaten track. And he would always come there as a brahmachari. And, I would set up all my little toys when he would give Bhagavatam class, and we would all like me and all my toys would listen, that kind of thing, right? So, and he would come and visit our family too, just kind of keep us in the loop, right? Um, so when we went to the temple, of course, there was a whole bunch of random teenagers staying there on their Christmas vacation. And I would have been 15 at the time, going on 16. And it was wonderful. So we did a shadow play about Srila Prabhupada put together in a week. We would stay up rehearsing till, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and then get up for Mangalarti. And it was so intense. And when you're in a theater situation, um, I've done quite a lot of theater in my life. I worked in it professionally for some years, and it's a very bonding experience, and doubly so with other devotees. And these were youth, my own age. These were my peers all of a sudden. They weren't random, new bhaktins and bhaktas that Maharaj had brought to our house, and everybody says Hare Krishna, and it's a bit awkward, and you move on. Um, these were my peers, and they were people who also lived far away from the temple. And suddenly I found my people. And it was so incredible. And I'm so grateful. I mean, what's fantastic is my best friend came out of that week. And I have this woman who just had this fleeting interest in high school to thank for that. So she's like, that person who Krishna arranged to pull me there. And then after that, I started getting serious. So, I started chanting japa. I was like, there was some weird bus strike. And so they were giving away free rides between the town I lived in and that place. And so I would just hop on a bus and go to Toronto, which was 2 hours away, um, by myself, sometimes taking a sister or two, and go and spend time with my friends. Like there was one family who they were based um there in Toronto, and then the other family was like 5 or 6 hours north. So we would meet there too, and it was really wonderful. And then, we went on a couple of bus tours. Those were so grounding in terms of like connecting with other um, second generation peers and understanding that this was a shared experience. Because growing up, there's like, I had had a real identity crisis. I wasn't Western, but I wasn't Indian. So, like, where did I fall in? And then it wasn't until, so meeting all these other second generation who were in a similar state of limbo, I suppose, for lack of a better description, um, was really, it was just wonderful, right? And then when I was 20, I went and I worked on the Abhay Charan film series that Bhakti True Maharaj
Wow.
had put together. And so for me, all of a sudden, I had a cultural identity. I was an ISKCON devotee, and here was the history of it. Because I hadn't really, I had read the Prabhupada Lilamrita when I was 9, but it doesn't penetrate the same way as when you're an adult. So all of a sudden, there was this. this history and background. And then, looking into it a little further, all of a sudden you look into the Gaudiya Vaishnav tradition and you go, whoa, okay, no, I'm actually connected with something huge here. That's amazing. And so it suddenly settled, my place in the world kind of settled in a really wonderful way.
Mm, mm.
And then I split it off into the world of Maya because it was the association I had, right? That was like around maybe my second year of university. And so I always call it my 7 years bad luck. And I had like a period that was really off and on and really like, getting into like intoxicants and all the partying and the just like pointless things. Um, and but what's very interesting, and every time I try and walk away, Krishna shows up in the most incredible way. So I had this one experience, and this was um, I lived in the town of Whistler, which is it's a party town. People go there to like party and ski, and it's high sense gratification. And I had gone there to work and make some money so I could, travel, go to university, whatever. Um, and I was in a phase where I was not doing very well. And so I was going to see a concert and I was in the lineup with a friend, and this guy comes up to me and he starts, chatting me up. But his line was terrible. I had these big hoop earrings with bells on them. And he goes, "Are those Hindu earrings?" And I was like, okay, we need to have some talk about terminology and how you can use correct terms. And I, I've never been very good at flirting. I've always been good at like, let's correct your grammar. And that's been my like thing. Anyway, so we start talking and then we're talking about music and, we're getting along just fine. So finally he says, "Give me your number. I have something I think you'd really like." And I said, "Nice try. No, I don't think so. But if you're serious, here's where I work. You can come and drop it off there." And so, saw the concert, forgot, I don't even remember what it was, but whatever. But this conversation had marked me. And then a few days later, lo and behold, this guy actually does show up and he hands me a cassette tape. And on that cassette tape, remember back in the day when we would like make mixtapes? It was wonderful. So this was the mixtape. And on the cover is a black and white photo of Srila Prabhupada.
Wow.
And on the inside, you've got Srila Prabhupada, Vishnu Jan Maharaj, Narada Prabhu, like all of these like classic ISKCON kirtans all mixed up. And I went, okay, I got the message. So all of a sudden I was like, okay, I'm stopping this nonsense. I'm going back to chant my Radha, because obviously I still brought my beads with me everywhere I went, even though I wasn't chanting at all. I still had them with me when I moved across the country. Um, it's funny just how he prepares you for these little things. Um, so yeah, I started going back to doing that. And, I didn't have my deities with me at that time, but I had pictures and whatnot. So I started doing like a little puja to the pictures and chanting japa. And every once in a blue moon, I'd be chanting my rounds and walking to work through the village square, and I would hear Hare Krishna Mataji, and there would be some random Guru Goalies who were up there to go snowboarding or whatever. And I always found that so funny, right? And then another time I was, and this was a few years later, I had again just like slumped, had a boyfriend who was not the most positive association. Um, but I was having a really rough time. There was some like really heavy stuff happening in my family, and it just like I was really in a depression. And I was wearing this Harinam chadar that I'd had since I was a baby. There were pictures of me like wrapped up in this Harinam chadar. One of the few things that survived uh, are fire because I brought it with me. Um, but anyway, so I was wrapped up in that Harinam chatter, and he looks at me and he said, "Do you still chant japa?" because I was chanting japa when we had first, got together. And I said, no, why do you care? Because this person had no interest in Krishna consciousness. And he said, well, you were a better person when you did. And I went, whoa. So having that, just trying to get away. And I mean, this is sounding really like scary cult stuff, but this is Krishna, so it's all very charming. But, having this experience of somebody who has absolutely zero interest in Krishna consciousness, but recognized the benefit of chanting and vocalized it. For me, that was Krishna coming out of that person's mouth and speaking to me. So I went, okay. And again, picked up the beads and started, chanting again. Um, so fast forward a couple more years. This, like I said, is the off and on of 7 years bad luck. And um, I was just having a rough time. I was like depressed and wondering what I was doing with my, this is like, in the middle of my master's degree. I had moved to Quebec at this point, and was just kind of not in a good space. And I just paused and asked when I was last happy. And the answer was when I was Krishna conscious. So I had gone to, I was going to the temple haphazardly just because it's familiar and after that I was like, actually, I need to attend more. So I dropped the friends who were, I felt like I needed to like be heavily intoxicated before I could actually face them. And I went, those aren't friends. Like, who are these people if I can't face them without that much of a buffer? So drop that. And then I again started doing theater as encouraged by Maharaj. And he had never been like, what, like, some people, oh, you're finally back. Oh, like these weird sort of acknowledging that you're back, but kind of a little bit derogatory of, okay, you're here. Um, there was never that feeling. It was always just like, he met me where I was at. Oh, when are you going to come back and do theater with us? Okay, so this was a point where, I was working in theater and it was something I really enjoyed. And so it was the hook and it worked. And through theater, of course, you make those very close friendships. And all of a sudden, and then I realized, I really want to be a pujari. And that desire and that connection, because of course, when I moved, I brought all my deities and the whole, pantheon of the spiritual world is there. There's, Radha Krishna, Gopal, the Sringadev, Gauri Tai, like everybody's there, Jagannath. And so it made me reconnect with that and go, actually, I want to take this seriously and I'd like to be a pujari. So that got me going, I want to take this seriously. And my friend, of course, the wonderful Kruta Shakti, she was that friend I met when I was 15. And, we were still in touch, but of course lived a country away, a very large country away from each other. And so we started encouraging each other and be like, yeah, me too. Maybe we should start thinking about initiation. And then we're also a little bit competitive with each other in the best possible way. And so I think we were just kind of egging each other on. And then the next thing I know, we were like asking for shelter. And then we took initiation together. And it was like this snowball effect. And I swear to God, within 7 months of getting this idea sparked, it snowballed into, okay, here you go. And now suddenly you've got this like spiritual practice that you have to take seriously because you made a vow.
Mm.
And growing up and obsessively listening to the Mahabharata tapes when I was a child, you know that when somebody makes a vow, the earth will fall from its orbit. The sun will fall from the sky, the mountains will crumble, and the oceans will dry up before my vow proves to be false. So we don't take vows lightly. And so, that was like a real deterring factor because for me, that meant something and it was not something to be taken lightly. So, I mean, I would say that my vow still proves to be false because I'm not uh, practicing to the degree I would like to be, but the desire is there. And, yes, my rounds are sometimes mechanical, most of the time mechanical, but there's still that like desire. Okay, this is my duty, and I've made this promise to someone who's connected to the parampara, and I feel very strongly that I should, when I make a commitment, I should uphold that. So, yeah, Krishna tricked me is the summary of all of that.
Thank you for sharing that. And it was great to hear how you reconnected with Krishna, with your friend as well. And I appreciate your honesty. I really appreciate how honest you've been in terms of sharing that, because sometimes devotees don't want to be honest because they want to pretend that everything's okay. So I really appreciate how you honestly answered that question. Um,
But if we
before we,
lie to ourselves,
yeah,
we're not going to make any progress. So it's very important to be honest with where we're at. And I think in terms of spiritual practice or anything in life, if we're lying to ourselves and the people around us, indirectly, even by lying to ourselves, we're not helping ourselves, we're not helping anyone else. So it's very important to be honest with where we're at and have real and honest relationships. It doesn't mean that we're like expose ourselves to everyone because there are a few to whom we can open our hearts and minds in confidence. Um, that's one of those loving exchanges, but we we shouldn't be faking it. It's not helpful.
I agree. I completely agree. Um, before we talk about our kind of main discussion point today, can we talk a bit about your work as a librarian? When you sent me
Sure.
your kind of short biography, I was quite intrigued by that. Because I also like reading and I do visit libraries. What is it about reading books and sharing knowledge with others that enthuses you so much?
Honestly, it was an accident I became a librarian. In hindsight, it seemed like it should have been obvious, but it was a total like, and maybe not accident, but it required some guidance. So, as a child, I vividly remember learning how to read or start the reading process at 3 years old, 3, 4 years old. Um, and then by six, I mean, again, being homeschooled, there was a great deal of reading. We did not have television, we didn't have internet, we didn't have any of these things to distract us. So the Maya I could get into was books, and spending time in a library was the one time we lived in town. We were there maybe a year or so, and every day we rode our bikes. As small children, I was 6 years old. We rode our bikes to the library and spent long hours there. Um, I remember reading like Dracula and Frankenstein and Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn at these ages, right? I didn't understand all of it, but I have very vivid images that I imagined reading these books. Um, and then, of course, reading Srila Prabhupada's books, there's a very high vocabulary. So I have found that it was much easier to read sort of that classic literature, which has a very different um, tone of language to what is being produced today. Um, so in hindsight, it should have been obvious that I would have taken on librarianship as a career. Um, but it was actually my ex's mother, who is kind of this wonderful, like, guru in the fiber arts and in like just has been a really wonderful life person and beautiful mother figure, and I adore her. And so she just kind of said, I was kind of waffling around and I had just finished my bachelor's degree, and my plan had been to become a teacher. And I had done so in Ontario. How you do it, you do your bachelor's degree, and then you do a 2-year program of education, and you go to teachers college, and then that's it, you're a teacher. Whereas then I moved to Quebec. I thought it was like that everywhere. I moved to Quebec, and suddenly I had to get a 4-year bachelor's degree in education. And I went, whoa, I was not prepared for this. And I already owe way too much money. Let's not do that. Um, so I didn't know what to do. And she said, well, why don't you become a librarian? It's a 2-year program, master's program. You don't have to write a thesis. It's a professional program. Do that. And I went, oh, right, of course. And it just took somebody saying it to me to think that was a great idea. So I did that, and I wanted actually to work in archives. I did not want to deal with people. I did not want to particularly work in a public library, nor with children. And then I graduated and was looking for a job, and there was one that opened up in the area, and it was for teens. And I went, oh, I don't know, it's a bit difficult getting over there. It's only part-time. I don't know if I want to stay here. And um, it's in a public library. Ugh. So I went and I applied for this job just because I needed something. And I got the job, which was even more of a surprise. And I loved the job, which was even more of a surprise. And actually, I have to credit that. I do enjoy reading. It's something, although interestingly enough, since moving to Saranagati, I don't read anymore, but we'll get into that later. Um, the there's something really fun also about somebody asking you for something obscure that you don't know how to find. And it's kind of a little bit like being a detective. So somebody says, this is the true story. This gentleman came in, he was about my age. He said, I used to come here when I was a kid, and I haven't been back in I don't know how many years. There was this book I just loved. It was blue, it was about this big, and it was about pigeons. Do you still have it? And I went, well, likely not, but let's hunt this down and let's try and find something. Well, it certainly wasn't in our collection anymore, but I did find online what the book was. And he looked at it and he was ecstatic because I had found this random old book that was no longer in print. And weirdly, somebody had it for sale. Well, the guy went online and he bought it. And the book looked terrible, but he had such great memories of it and it was such a weird request that not everybody would have delved deeply into finding it. But there's something very satisfying about being in a service role. And for me, particularly, working with teens. They're often a kind of like awkward phase. I needed a mentor as a teen. I was very, very depressed as a teen, except for those few moments when I was with other devotee peers. But then there was the rest of it. I still had to go to school. I still had to do this and that. I still had to go home, and it was just like it was not a happy time. And so the idea of being a mentor for that age group was very important to me. And if I could get them to, well, again, I was peddling Maya. So it was like you could give them an escape or something they could relate to or something that would help them grow. And that's really wonderful. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed that. And then while I worked in that role for 10 years. In that time period, I also opened up because suddenly I had experience and knew what I was doing. It was so strange. Um, and so I started a little lending library in the Montreal Temple. And in particular, the biggest group of people that we had coming to use that library were Francophones who wanted to read the Srimad Bhagavatam. It was very difficult to find French copies of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And so being able to offer that service and recommend other books. And so it translated into a number of areas. But ultimately, now that you're asking this question, what is so exciting and enthusing about it? It's actually being able to be of service to people.
Thank you. Wonderful answer. I'm loving how you're answering questions. They're full of enthusiasm, and quite concise as well, but in a positive way. So thank you for that. Okay, you mentioned it briefly just now. You mentioned a particular word which we're going to kind of touch on now. Since 2020, which believe it or not was 5 years ago. So since 2020, I know time just goes, doesn't it? Since 2020, you've been living as part of the Sharanagati village in Western Canada.
Saranagati. Yes.
Please tell us about the
So,
community and what inspired you to move there.
well, the honest answer for why we moved here is peer pressure. Um, no, truly. Okay. So at the end of my master's degree, as I was finishing up, I a very lovely man in orange proposed to me suddenly out of the blue, who I had been secretly fanning myself over. But I know how that goes. You do not look at the caution sign wearing orange. You stay away from that. Um, but we had worked very well together. So we were engaged and married. And um, throughout that whole stretch. We had always spoken about living rurally and having these rural communities. And we didn't want to be farmers, but we wanted to provide that space for people to do it. We wanted it to be an educational project. Um, we wanted it to be in the Montreal area, so accessible. We could have a retreat center. So we're we're very like we're big dreamers. We have big ideas and we talk a lot. So, that was always sort of there. And we also really wanted to build that because everybody was always leaving Montreal to either go to Alachua or go to Sharanagati. And so we were like, this exodus has to stop. We need something local. So for years, we just, okay, yeah, dreaming, 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 dreaming. But we're both working so much. He was in school, finishing up to be a teacher for a chunk of that, and then was working as a teacher in a very high stress, like turnover environment. Um, and I was working as a librarian, and in there we had two little girls, and it was a lot going on. So obviously nothing was happening, but we had a timeline for when we wanted to move to the country. So it was, we're going to purchase a house in the country at that point. Now, again, Krishna's very tricky. So we just decided for fun, let's just look at some properties. Let's look at houses because, it's getting a little small, this little basement apartment, and the girls are getting bigger, and let's just see what's there. So we just, for fun, were looking at things. And then the real estate agent was like, this place isn't for you. It's not to your needs. And next thing you know, we were buying a house, which was on like my part-time income at the time. And I was like, wait, how did that happen? But it was also very exciting. We felt like grown-ups suddenly and, had a space for our girls to grow up. And because we had that bigger space, we also had friends come and visit. And so we had one friend in particular who would come to Montreal for work. They're originally from there and would come to Montreal for work and would stay with us and preach the glories of Sharanagati, which we had already visited. Damodar, some of his, that's my husband, some of his big moments had all happened here. His whole like moment of like clicking toward Krishna conscious. He also second generation, but had a very different experience growing up than I did. It was very little Krishna consciousness in his earlier years. And then he was a depressed teenager, and his dad brought him out here, connected him with some other second generation, and all of a sudden something clicked. And then he became a brahmachari for 10 years and joined the ashram and like became a devotee. And it was like this whole thing. So there's this connection here. He knew a lot of the devotees. Um, my parents, I remember visiting here when I was 11 or so. I had written in my journal, like, I had described worms in a water barrel and dust. And that was what I had described. I have these images in my head, and there's something very ruggedly beautiful about them, but also it didn't click that I was going to live there eventually. It would just seem like this desert. Well, it kind of is a desert here. Um, so yeah, peer pressure. Our friend came to visit because now we had the space we could host guests and preached the glories of Sharanagati. And we had come and done those oral history interviews of the pioneer devotees who had established this. And so there was that connection already. So we're okay, we know people, and it's real. And why are we? This was 3 years of peer pressure, by the way, every single summer. And finally, we had hit a low point, and we both got very emotional, and we're like teary, and like I'm sobbing. I'm like, why are we saying no to this? It's already established. Everything isn't going to be such a fight, because everything up until then, there had been obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And so the person who's done this, there's some very interesting thing. This is in connection with deities. So when we were there about 12 years ago doing these interviews, as we were leaving, one of the senior devotees, whom we had not interviewed for whatever reason, but he had requested, because he was kind of an ashram leader. He took care of Damodar when he was in the ashram. And so he said, please stop by before you leave. So we did. And Damodar comes back. I was waiting in the car. It was just a quick thing. And Damodar comes back and he says, he gave me a Sheila. And he was kind of freaking out because deity worship is not his thing. It intimidates him. It's overwhelming to him. But for me, I'm like, bring them all on. And so there was the Sheila. But we were also in this stage of life that we were not worshiping. A lot of the deities were sleeping. We were not worshiping them. We were taking care of what I call our Muchi deities. Those are our children. And so we like, that was the focus. And because we couldn't maintain proper cleanliness standards, all of that. So then we visited this devotee down in Florida, and he chastised us, says, you can't actually put to sleep a Sheila. They have to be worshipped every day. And so we went, oh, whoops. So we started worshiping him. And very quickly, and he's a Gopal Sheila, so cows. So very quickly, things snowballed. And all of a sudden, so this was within a few months, we had kind of made this decision. We had made an application for this community. It's being a family community, there's quite a process to go through to get in, which actually was very relieving for us. You have to go through a criminal record check. You have to go through that CPO check, like all this screening process. And so for me, that makes me feel much better about raising children in such a space. So within a few months of worshiping Gopal, suddenly we were on a plane to come look at a house. And this was like, this would have been 2020. So that was March. We got back. We put our house up for sale too. Got back, and then everything shut down for COVID. And suddenly we were like, oh my God, how do we sell our house? Like, it's up for sale. We had received offers. They all fell through. but we had already made an offer on this other place and we were supposed to move and everything was shut down. And anyway, somehow Krishna arranged things. But my point is, Gopal wanted to come home. So he removed all the obstacles. And again, that snowball effect. Remember, I mentioned with initiation and taking Krishna consciousness seriously, suddenly these ideas that had been percolating and just like getting together and they were there and wishes, and suddenly they rolled out of control and we were here. Um, yeah, it was very quick. We moved here in July, drove across the country with barely any traffic, and there was something really nice about it. But the reasons we were attracted to this community, I had mentioned like safety. It's a very family-oriented community. There's, I'd say about 75, 80 people who live here. Um, for me, the biggest deciding factor was actually that second generation wanted to raise their children here. I gauge a community based on how many second generation want to stay. I gauge the success based on how many second generation want to raise their own children in a particular environment. So that was here. And also we had these connections with these really incredible senior devotees and just, I mean, there is such amazing quality of devotees here. And I mean, it's not to say that, we're not still in the material world and we still don't all have like different conditionings and different, opinions when it comes to material matters. So, because it's a holding company. So there's a land holding corporation in which we're shareholders, and that's kind of the structure. And you have to decide things together and kind of manage this mini little government thing together and common resources. And we don't always see eye to eye. However, when we come together and serve Srila Prabhupada, we are fully united. So the thing that matters is what holds us together. And the rest is just noise that comes up every so often. So yeah, there's a little school here. We have a little temple here, which has again, accidentally now is like a tourist destination. It was not like on the map at all. I mean, barely on the map, but somebody posted a random TikTok video and it went viral. And all of a sudden it's an interesting problem to have. Um, so now we suddenly have so many visitors and they'll drive like 4 hours just to come and have darshan for half an hour, and then they turn around and go back because we're very far away from most things. The nearest big town is, an hour and a half away, and so many people come there regularly. Okay, it's my birthday. We're going to drive out to that temple in the hills, and it's incredible. The challenge, however, is people come from, say, Vancouver, where it's very mild, and they'll come without winter tires or proper winter gear. And there's no cell reception out here. So suddenly you'll have people walking in their little slip-on shoes, like trying to find somebody to help them because they've run off the road. And just like there's fun challenges here. We're entirely off-grid.
Wow.
It's pretty wild. And it's not suited for everyone, but I love this place. It's wonderful. And the community is incredible. I'm so grateful for this space and these people, and Prabhupada's appearance and disappearance day festivals. There are a large number of Prabhupada disciples who were actually with him when he left. So they're very potent because there's such dedication and such, it's really, we're so fortunate.
How old is the community? I mean, how long have a lot of these people been living there?
I'd say 40 something years.
Wow.
Um, and I mean, there's been different incarnations. There was when it was first purchased, I think maybe 82 or 83. And then when the corporation was founded, maybe 86. I'm not super clear on the dates of that. But it's been here a while and a lot of, well, there's been a lot of turnover too, because it's a challenging environment. But those who have stuck here, they're amazing. And the people who have raised their children here and their children are here raising their children, that's really special. And I just feel so honored that we get to be here and serve with those Vaishnavas.
Mm,
So,
mm.
yeah,
It does
it's,
sound amazing, and to have 70, 80 people living there in a community in Western Canada sounds very special. And it's great to hear that
yeah,
so many people have stayed such a long time, because they're so
yeah.
attracted to what's happening there. That kind of collective Shakti or, potency.
So when we drove off the highway, this is in 2020, July 13th, 2020, and we drove off the high, and my girls, they're just like, whatever. There wasn't super strong spiritual practice at home that they could necessarily see because we were working so much and, you know, chanting our rounds in the car on the way to work and that kind of thing, right? So it was, and we'd show up to Sunday feast once a week if we managed to get there and whatever, right? My eldest daughter, the second we turned the corner off the highway and we reached a certain point, and all of a sudden she spontaneously started chanting Hare Krishna. It was like,
Wow.
whoa, there's something here, All of these hills and these trees, they've been reverberating that sound vibration for 40 something years. And it's there, you can feel it. And the people who come and visit, the reason, we have a guest book at the temple, and the recurring word over and over and over again, so peaceful. So there's this level of like, you know, there is that calming effect and that grounding effect of the holy because there's beautiful places all over the province, all over the world, but there's something else here, and it's the Maha Mantra, and it's people chanting the Maha Mantra collectively for such a long extended period of time, and that makes it a holy dham.
It sounds wonderful, actually. It sounds like I absolutely want to visit.
You
Yeah, and I
should.
and I've yes, if I ever make it to Canada, I will definitely come and visit. Yes, it sounds like a wonderful place. How I say however, then. Next question. I'm not going to say however, actually. In addition to that, last summer, that's the best way to enter this next part of the conversation. In addition
Yes.
to that, just last summer, much of the properties in the village were destroyed due to a devastating wildfire that did sweep across the area. How is the community now? And what has the recovery been like?
So we actually got off very lucky. Much of the forest surrounding, like coming down the mountains, has been burnt. Um, we managed, or not, we managed. Most of the homes are intact. Our home was one that did not make it through the fire. Ours burnt. Um, so a very interesting experience. We Okay, so in light of what's been happening lately in Los Angeles and the sheer scale of devastation has reinforced so deeply
Mm,
gratitude by how lightly we were touched by this fire. And
mm,
this is coming from somebody who lost pretty much everything.
mm.
However, So, okay, let's tell the story of how it came about. We live in a very dry climate. We're between two mountain ranges. So there's the coastal mountains and the Rocky Mountains. Um, what happens when you have clouds coming across? They smash into those mountains and it kind of gets trapped there. So us in these mountains between there, the intermountains, we get very little rain. So we're in a very deserty area. Um, and last winter, we had next to no snowfall. We very much appreciate snow. Snow is when the moisture enters the ground and stays there. We need that spring runoff. And again, being off grid, our water comes from the mountain. Like if we don't get proper spring runoff, we have reduced water.
Mm.
So that impacts growing food, that impacts just basic bathing, that impacts, watering animals, that all of these things, right? So we had very, very little snow last winter. Um, so coming into spring, we knew it was going to be a bad fire year. We didn't know how bad, but we knew it was going to be bad. So July 12th or something, sometime around there, there was finally we get to see some clouds, but what happens is we get dry lightning. And so there's no rain to put out any lightning strikes. So a lightning strike hit in a few places on the mountains in our area. One of it was a few ridges over, and it was kind of just left to go instead of putting it out and not letting it get out of control. They figured, oh, well, maybe we'll do a back burn or whatever. No, forest fire is a natural part of forest management. And because we've prevented forest fire because of human habitation for so long, the forests are improperly managed. So that means you have a lot of very dry, dense growth, and it's on the forest floor. So if you get a lightning strike, you're going to get fire. And with everything being so dry already, it was all it took is that little spark. We actually had a meeting with our local municipal government and the wildfire service, a community meeting at the school, just to kind of talk about the reality, because this was at this point a giant smoke plume that we could see over the mountain ridge. And so the meeting was to talk about the realities of living with this fire for the next few months because it wasn't going anywhere. The meeting started at 6. I was sitting that day, we had done like all this work out in the orchard. We had harvested a ton of cherries, a whole bunch of wild Saskatoons. We had like mulched underneath all the fruit trees, given them a really good watering. And excuse me. And then I was there pitting cherries when my husband went to the meeting. And 13 minutes later, he came back. He said, look out the window. The fires crested the ridge. So they actually spotted it at the meeting, which was incredible. Like, had that happened 3 hours later, we would have been looking at casualties as well as loss of habitation. But Krishna arranged things so nicely. And there was a large portion. I mean, the firefighter or one of the lead fire folk, he had said it was the first time or second time in his like full span of career that there had been 100% cooperation and evacuation in a situation like this. So we were just so fortunate. Like we had the time to pack some things
Mm.
and leave. We had a few hours. That being said, I mean, we started packing. We had already told the girls, there's a possibility for an alert. Now we have a few sheep and a sheepdog, so we hadn't yet moved them. The thought was when we get an official alert, we'll evacuate them so that we don't have to worry about that when we're told, given the order. But we didn't have anything official. We didn't have any alert or order. It just suddenly jumped two ridges and came. Um, so we were there watching this fire literally roar. Like, the people talk about a roaring fire. When my husband came and said, you need to go out and look, the sound, I thought it was a huge brigade of helicopters coming to work on it.
Wow.
That's how intense the sound was. And you could feel the heat. And of course, there's this column of smoke rising up and over. And I mean, it looks like Armageddon. Everything is red because the sun is shining through this incredible smoke. And then there's like 200-foot flames like roaring up these trees. It was it was incredible. But like you just and I had touched on this earlier. I don't know if we were recording yet or not, but this talk, I'm a control freak. I like to be in control. I like to manage all the little details, and I'm in very high anxiety trying to do that all the time. And this is my entire life. And yet, in this moment, there wasn't anything I could do. I tried. We couldn't even load our sheep. We tried for an hour. They would not load. So we had to make this horrible decision of opening the gates and hoping that the super soul could guide them out of the way. And then we just had to drive away. Um, that felt awful. Um, but there was this huge like moment of surrender. We can't do anything. And yet at the same time, okay, so during fire season, I have this habit of every night reading the prayers of the residents of Vrindavan when they're faced with forest fire. And so when I left, one of the books I grabbed was this old copy of the Krishna book because that's what I was reading every night. And I knew I was going to need it that night. But we thought, the village had been evacuated before for serious fires. They'd leave a few days, no problem, come right back. So I didn't take it as seriously as I ought to have, which is probably a good thing because I was just kind of a little bit semi-casual about it. But the panic rang, like when we're faced with such intense situations of perceived suffering
Mm.
or suffering. But in that case, it was mostly mental, right? That we were all safe. We just had to leave our space. Um, the intensity of prayer is incredible. And I am not in any way aspiring. I mean, I should, but I'm really not. I'm not in any way aspiring to be at Queen Kunti's level and actually pray for calamity. However, I recognize why she sent that prayer because you actually do fully surrender and connect with Krishna. Um, but I'm not there. I I would like a little relief at this point. Anyway, so we all evacuated and the it was so interesting because we have to go to the center and register. And then you register for services and some kind of place to stay, and they give you like funding for food and clothing and basic things like that. So all of us go to this center, and it's the first big fire of the season, and they're all volunteers, and it's a little insane. But the mood of the community versus the mood of the other people from the next valley over who were also being evacuated was very different. We were all together and almost jovial, but also like, you know, we were going through all the emotions, but we were together. And that mood was so incredible. And so I remember one of our friends, her saying like how traumatic it was to like wake up the next morning And I think we were just so fortunate because we were waiting around for everybody else to get their billeting and their place to stay. And then in the evening, like this was about midnight now, we were evacuated. We left by I think 8:30 p.m. And then by about midnight, finally everybody had been gone through. And they had run out of hotel rooms at that point. So there was our family and four senior devotees who had no place to go. And our amazing friend, he lives in the next town over. Now, again, this is this interesting connection. This is somebody who's like family. The little brother of one of those friends I made when I was 15. So that family who was my second family, he said, well, you guys have no place to go. Everybody come with me. He waited until everybody had a place to go and brought everybody who was left over to his home and found a place for them. So when we woke up the next, I don't think anybody got any sleep that night. We were all up like texting each other and like it's just whatever. And probably every single one of us fell asleep 4 or 5 in the morning. But the next morning when we woke up, we were in the house of people who cared deeply about us and whom we cared deeply about. They had cooked a feast for us. And then we just spent quality time with them. So, and this was our experience all the way through this displacement is people opening their homes and hearts to us and welcoming us and just taking care of us. And so when we finally found out that our home had burnt, which was a very interesting experience because there were a lot more evacuees in the area. So they moved anybody who didn't have a job locally to Kamloops, which is, an hour and 15, hour and a half away. So a few days later, we were displaced there. So we had to go through the whole system all over again, and it was this big hoopla. And then I've totally lost my train. No, so we went there and were welcomed there. And something really amazing that the local government had done is they actually got us a community center so that we could stay together. We could pool all of our grocery resources and cook meals together. And like we were really well taken care of. So we went to this community center to start deal with lunch prasad or something like that. And everybody was getting the news. Like one of the community members, he was liaising with the fire wildfire services. And so he had to go into the village and identify the structures that were burnt. It would have been such an awful role to be in because he saw it at its absolute worst. It looked like Armageddon. Like he took videos and you see these movies or something, right? And there's just the blackened trees and there's smoke everywhere and everywhere is ash. And that was what was left. That was what we were seeing. And our house, it just was gone. It was just gone. And you know what's so funny? My husband and I, we said, because we had had a bit of a laundry backup because of the whole water shortage that was going on previous to that. And I said, well, I don't have to worry about that laundry anymore. And that outhouse that was full of all this random stuff that we've been meaning to deal with for years, we don't have to deal with it anymore. It's dealt with. And then we had this joke because we zoomed in on the picture and like the solar array, like all the panels, it was still standing. And it looked like the orchard was kind of okay, even if it was a little singed. And the propane tank was still there. It hadn't exploded or anything. And because um we had like some electric fences, we would move around our sheep to graze. And so right near the house, there was this red bucket that was the sheep's water bucket. And we were like, the red bucket's still there. We still have a red bucket. Like, of all these things to survive, we've got a bucket. So this was this running joke of like, this was this little symbol of hope. Um, so we just made a lot of very uncomfortable jokes and it was fine. But there was such relief. Everybody else, because that was the same time that the fire activity was increasing so much and the egress routes for the firefighters were blocked. So they had to pull out. They could no longer stay in the valley. So they pulled out. So everyone's in this high anxiety about their homes still because their homes are still standing. And we didn't have to worry about it because we already knew
Mm,
it was gone.
mm,
So, and there was this relief, right? And then I was thinking about, okay, well, it's all just material stuff. Krishna has very kindly removed all of our material attachments. And for me, like, okay, so I have this fledgling business I'm trying to launch called Material Desires Artisan Textiles, and I make ahimsa wool products for deities. Um, so it's kind of funny that, these material desires gone up in smoke, literally. Um, all of these sort of things. And so we were sort of taking mental inventory and thinking, like, well, all of this is replaceable. What's not replaceable? And so I thought about things like, my kids' artwork. I had taken a lot of pictures, but, some of it was special and I wanted to keep it. And my one daughter in particular is this incredible artist, and she had just finished this beautiful painting of Krishna, and she was so like enamored with it. And she wanted to sell prints of it. So I said, okay, post Rath Yatra, once everything settles down, we'll do that. And it didn't happen. Um, and then I was saying, I have decades worth of journals. Those are irreplaceable. Like I've traveled around the world and kept these meticulous notes, and all of a sudden I went, actually, much of that are just a catalog of trauma. And now that has been removed. And because my body is deteriorating, I've forgotten so much of it. And my children never have to take on that trauma ever. So this is another huge blessing that was just like all of these things, like these little like sentimental things that I've been hauling around for decades, moved across the country, and they're just sitting in boxes and closets, and I'm never going to look at them again. And maybe, a couple of little pieces might be interesting for my kids down the road, but ultimately, it's really not. Like, I'm not that important. And it was, there is that sense of like self-importance that comes with that as well. And so just being relieved of all of that weight was incredible. And feeling with absolute certainty that we were held in Krishna's hands and being taken care of beyond a shadow of a doubt. We're not victims. We're
mm.
recipients of such incredible mercy. And this is the very interesting part. All of us have big desires, big, small, whatever. We have many desires. Um, so my husband and I, and some friends with the same sense of humor, we would play this game, Whose Fault Is It? And we would, okay, so my husband had this desire to do outreach to our local, like the local town and the local individuals there. suddenly we were in the spotlight, and like the Hare Krishna village on fire was across the news in Canada and around the world. And suddenly there was this outreach happening just because this devotee in Kamloops, he had this very strong desire to like have devotees in his home and like be able to be of service and have community. Well, we were all there every single day for weeks on end. Like I desire to not deal with that dirty laundry and that mess in the outhouse. So all of us had these little desires. And when we put them all together, everyone said, oh, geez, I had wished for that. We went, wow. Krishna, in one single event, managed to fulfill all of these desires in a seeming catastrophe, but actually, he's fulfilling our desires and doing it way better than we would ever think. So, honestly, like, he's in charge. We just have to accept the mercy and also look at the prescription. So, we were given a warning with this. And it's like, you go, this wonderful devotee, she gave this example. She says, you have a heart attack and you go to the doctor and they say, okay, so here's what you need to do to change your life so that this doesn't happen again. And you go, okay, yes, thank you, doctor. And you do those changes or you die. We've been given that same opportunity. We've been given the warning. You have to thin your forests and take care of them properly. You have to do this, 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 and this. Otherwise, there could be the entire village could be demolished.
Mm.
We only lost 6 homes. Now, in the grand scheme, and not all of them were like full-time occupied as well. We were the only like family home that was destroyed that lived there full time, and had kids. So we've been so well taken care of, and this community has come together so incredibly. And not just like the residents of Sharanagati, I'm talking the broader community. All of a sudden, all of these people in Ashcroft, the little town right up there, all of these people have been just coming and being so supportive, like all over the place. And so our community has suddenly grown, and it's like the hearts grow with that. And the most incredible connections have happened. So, I mean, we all have moments of being very overwhelmed and perhaps also being a little fearful of what next summer's going to look like and fire season and sort of all those things. But ultimately, at least from my perspective, we have been given such a gift, and we have been, I mean, there's the challenge of rebuilding an uninsured home that you're still paying a mortgage on, right? So there's all of those material challenges that are there. And yet, they will be met when they're supposed to be, because Krishna's the boss. And we have a place to be. People have been very generous with like us getting basics of what we need. This incredible lady, she took it upon herself to source fence posts for us so we could get our animals back, right? The fence posts are still sitting there because the ground froze and we can't stick them in, but they're there. And just like these amazing things like that. I don't know.
And
It's
I think you've kind of answered this next question already, but how has the horrific wildfires, those experiences that you had last summer, how has that experience um impacted your faith? Have you questioned Krishna at all, or have you just kind of um or has it enabled you to grow closer to Krishna?
without a shadow of a doubt closer to Krishna. I, um, I Because of how incredibly this happened, like it's very easy to look at the negative. It's very easy to say, why me? And I have had those questions, like, how come the firefighters saved that house,
Mm.
and not mine? How come they saved the kids' fort across the street and didn't get to mine? Like, but what happened there? But it's very, just looking at the situation, the way it was, and looking at it with gratitude. These are individuals who were given strengths and abilities by Krishna, who went toward the fire instead of away from like we did, who put this effort into, who come up with these, and the huge amount of support. I can't overlook those gestures from the Supreme Controller. I can't overlook, or I shouldn't overlook, the innumerable blessings that have come from this. If I do, I'm being ungrateful because, like things could be so much worse. And yet everything that's important was there. My daughter, she was 10 years old, and she said, Sharanagati is not a place, it's the people. That's pretty heavy insight from a 10-year-old. Again, for me, I hear Krishna's voice speaking out of people's mouths. And so the closeness of the community in this time of crisis was so beautiful. I mean, there are there are these community members who were applying, and they were coming for the summer just to kind of test it out. Now, I'm the membership liaison for the community, and I always recommend people so that they can be set up for success and not blindsided by the realities of living here, that they come um, and visit during the dead of winter when the pipes are freezing and everything is freezing, and you go outside and you're covered, your eyelashes are covered in frost, and blinking causes them to stay stuck together, like these sort of things. Do you know how to chop wood? Like just those basic practicalities. And they should come during fire season when there's very real danger and threat. And do you want to be part of that Sharanagati, that surrender? And that's what we're trying to achieve here. So that's kind of the suggestion. So this couple, they had come to test it out. Oh, they were tried by fire for real. And you know what? Once we all came back, they don't want to leave because of that community spirit and that togetherness and that support. And again, it's not the place. And yet the place, even scarred and damaged, and it's still beautiful. It's still peaceful. And there's such incredible, well, I think you said it earlier, Shakti here. So definitely, this has definitely brought us closer to Krishna, and most tangibly closer to the devotees, and not just devotees, but closer to this broader community we have. So if we can connect with others, this is important. We can't jump over devotees to get to Krishna. And he manifests himself and his mercy so profoundly through others. And we just have to recognize it and accept. Oh my goodness, you're showering me. Like, yes, thank you. I can't hold it all in these little hands, but we are definitely being showered with mercy, and just holding that and accepting it and being grateful is of utmost importance.
Mm. Well, your story is very inspiring. It's quite heartwarming, and I'm very encouraged to hear that you're still feeling so positive in your Krishna consciousness despite what happened, despite what has happened, because others would have questioned, the place of God. Where was Krishna? Where is Krishna? And I feel very enthused by how you have just accepted this as a part of Krishna's grand plan. And we all face challenges in life, and your particular challenge was, and the others in the community was a huge challenge, but you faced it head on. You learnt to surrender. You surrendered to the Lord, and that's what we should all try and get better at. And you saw Krishna's hand in everything. And I'm also pleased to see that you have somewhere to live. You look like you're living somewhere now. We're certainly recording this
We
podcast.
are.
You're still living in the community
Well,
there in a new home?
yeah, we're just two doors down, and this is funny again. The whose fault is it game? Um, when this place came up for sale, this is actually the place that we lived for a few weeks when we first moved to Saranagati. It was empty. It's a mobile home, and we landed here for a few weeks before the other devotees had moved out of the place that was to become our home. Um, and it went up for sale last year, and we thought, if we had the money, it would be great to have that and manage it as a guest house. Now, now we're here, and eventually, like it would, will, I mean, we'll have to rebuild and like bit by bit, but as we save up and build that new home, suddenly that desire to be able to serve guests is being fulfilled as well. So we also have to be careful what we wish for because Krishna will do things in very interesting manners.
Yeah.
So he has a fantastic sense of humor. So remember when I said the house burnt and I was so relieved to not have to deal with that backlog of dirty laundry? Well, when we were digging through the rubble, my husband got to the laundry room and guess what was unburnt under all the ash? Dirty laundry.
My goodness.
So
Krishna definitely has a sense of humor.
he does. So we thought that would make a great country song. And our friends who we were staying with, we would like randomly burst into a rousing chorus of unburned dirty laundry, unburned dirty laundry, and just like be silly about the whole thing because, well, he's got the best sense of humor, and that one was pretty funny, even if it was a little bit of a smack. It was pretty funny. He's got a great sense of humor.
Believe it or not, Radha Krishna, we've been talking for almost 2 hours.
What?
Um,
No.
you and I have been talking for 2 hours. We've been recording this wonderful conversation for well over an hour and a half, and it's been. I love how you keep smiling. You smile a lot, and you have a wonderful smile, and you're such a great example of someone who's experienced all of these negative, and I use that term in inverted commas, negative things, perceived negative things in life, but you're still smiling. You're still following Krishna, and you see Krishna's hand in everything. And I think we can all learn from you. We can definitely all learn from you, because most people won't experience what you've experienced. So
I
thank you
hope
for
not.
yeah,
I
I
hope
hope not
the
as well. I mean, it's too cold in the UK
first game,
for any
but maybe not
wildfires.
this format.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you sharing your story, and I hope that it's an inspiration or it is inspiring to others that listen to this, that watch this
Well,
podcast. Um,
I'm happy to be of service if I can be of service, I'm happy.
and thank you for your service today, for your seva. So what I'm going to do with this podcast, I'm actually going to put a link uh to the community's Facebook page, website, so they can look it up. And maybe they'll come and visit someday. You never know, because we do have also a lot of viewers and listeners from North America, and maybe
Hmm.
well, and from Europe. Maybe those from Europe will want to come and visit as well, but particularly those from North America. So I'm going to say goodbye to the viewers at home, and you and I can have a brief debrief after. So I'm
Sounds
incredibly
good.
grateful to Radha Krishna for being our 159th guest on the Hare Krishna Project podcast. And she came with a recommendation as well, which is even better. So a previous guest on this podcast recommended her, which makes it extra special that she has had a really inspiring story to tell. So I'm very grateful to Radha Krishna for being our guest this week. Do not forget, if you have forgotten, I say this every week, but do not forget if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. And or if you're watching this on Facebook and you haven't already, please do like or follow the Hare Krishna Project Facebook page. Those are the two ways you can be kept updated about this podcast and other things we're doing here at the Hare Krishna Project. Okay, and if you also want to be a future guest on the Hare Krishna Project podcast, you can contact us through our websites. Forgot what it was then, harekrishnproject.org.uk, or you can email us info@harekrishnproject.org. Okay, so until next week, I'll see you all soon. Thank you. Hare Krishna.